Today's guest specializes in sight fishing for brown trout. He has a strong connection to Ireland, but guides in New Zealand now. He has a father and grandfather who were both diehard fly anglers, and he's been writing for Sexyloops for over 20 years. If New Zealand is on your bucket list, then you don't want to miss this episode, because today we're going to find out how to catch big browns by sight. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, how's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and guides than just about anyone out there. Ronan Creane is on the podcast today, and he's going to take us deep into New Zealand. Today, we get a feel for the areas in the country that makes New Zealand so popular. We're going to find out what the best time is to go fishing and when the best time not to go fishing in New Zealand is. And like I said, we're going to find out how to sight fish for big brown trout, and he's going to set our expectations today. Plus, you're going to discover why New Zealand isn't actually that far out of reach, and even though it's a day ahead, you're not even going to get jet lag on the way over across the sea. Let's find out how to put this one together. Here he is, Ronan Creane from Ronan's Fly Fishing Missions.com. How you doing, Ronan?
Not too bad, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on here. I've been checking around. I think I was looking back at the past New Zealand episodes, and we had a number of episodes, but a lot of them were from Americans that were traveling over, and like fishing and talking about it. So I think you're the first, actually. Well, I guess Peter Morse was on, and he talked a little bit on New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
That was quite a while ago, so it's been a while. But I think you live in New Zealand currently?
I do.
Yeah, and is that, maybe you could take us back there just on your story about, did you grow up there, or how did you kind of get into fly fishing?
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in Ireland. I lived in Ireland until I was 24 and moved out to New Zealand then. But growing up in Ireland, my earliest memory of fishing was there was a small stream beside my house, and I used to go over there with a little jam jar and a net and catch tiny little trout and put them in the jar, get as many as I could, and just admire them, and then let them all back into the river. And so that was my kind of my intro to trout and little eels. There were little eels there too.
Oh yeah.
So I was born into fly fishing though. Basically, my father and my grandfather were both fantastic fly fishermen. And my father still is, and still very competitive. Fly fishing was well and truly in the blood. So growing up, I didn't rush into fly casting and into fly fishing. Dad didn't, or actually it was my granddad that gave me my first fly rod, but not till I was 12. And that was fine with me. I mean, I knew it was on the cards. I knew it was something I wanted to do. I knew I loved it before I even started it. But I was happy with my spinning rod. I was happy just kind of taking a slow lead into fly fishing. And I remember, I have some really great memories of my father fishing when I was very young. Mainly, there's one that always stands out. There was a friend of Dad's called Declan. Declan Ridge was his name. And back in the days when we used to have sea trout before salmon farms, Declan used to come to the house on an evening, and he'd always bring a bag of dairy milks. So we were always happy to see Declan coming, mainly for the bag of dairy milks. And then Declan and Dad would disappear off to go night fishing for sea trout, and they'd be gone till about 2:00 in the morning. But I'd be waiting in my bedroom for them to come home, and I'd hear the door opening, and I'd stick my head down, and of course I'd be sent back up to bed. But I'd always come down to have a look at the fish, because back then they used to take sea trout, and there'd be a bag of sea trout on the kitchen sink. Sometimes great big ones, but always sea trout. And then they'd sit and have a drink and have a chat at the end. And I'd be listening from upstairs about the night's sea trout fishing. And I was just fascinated. So those are the things that, really planted the seed of fly fishing for me. But then when I was 12, my grandfather gave me a glass fly rod. It was, the softest fly rod you could imagine. And I remember my first day out was with Dad and Granddad on Loch Corrib. And fishing all day, and Dad was such a keen and focused angler. Like, he did want to teach me, but it was sometimes hard for him to give me the time that I needed to really get started in fly casting. So I was dropped in at the deep end. I was basically just put in the middle and told to fish, and I did my best. And I remember at the end of that day, I hooked a brown trout for 1.5 pounds on a black Zulu, and I landed it, and I'll never forget it. So that was my first day.
So did he give you a casting lesson at all, or did you just kind of learn on your own?
Dad said to me, he said, "You've been watching me casting for long enough to know how to cast."
Really? That's awesome.
Something along those lines was my my intro to casting. So anyway, I did my best and came up with the goods. And over the years, we fished together a lot from then on. And I remember my hands used to get so cold in those early days that I wouldn't be able to tie knots. I wouldn't be able to get my tangles out. So I'd have to ask Dad, would you mind taking my tangle out? And I would hate asking him because, he's so focused. He's fishing. He's watching the water in front of him. The last thing he wants to have to do is take my tangles out. But he always did. Then when I got to about 15, I got, strong enough and more resilient to the cold, and my casting got better. And it was really from then that I really settled into fly fishing. And from then it became, really enjoyable when I was actually able to hold my own in the boat for the day. I was able to fish with Dad, and rather than, him helping me every step of the way. That was the turning point, really.
And this was in Ireland?
Yeah, this is in Ireland. I mean, my fishing life was in Ireland right up till I was 24. I didn't leave Ireland till I was 24.
Yeah. So you guys, what were you fishing? So you're in a boat, and you were fishing these were brown trout?
Yeah, in a boat. So the west of Ireland lakes are Loch Mask, Loch Corrib and Loch Carra. And the main one that Dad and I fished was Corrib. We also spent quite a bit of time on Mask and sometimes Carra. And that was all brown trout. So you're basically, it was traditional loch style fishing a lot of the time. You're just fishing a team of wet flies in a rolling wave, fishing the drift. And then as the years went on, I also saw a progression in other styles of fishing on the lakes back home. And the main one would have been buzzer fishing. I remember growing up, buzzers were like the chironomid or duck fly, what we call them, duck fly. So I remember my father fishing the duck fly in the early days. They used to fish them with small traditional flies like a Peter Ross or...
like a little wet fly.
Yeah, little wet flies. So small black and red and silver kind of wet flies would work. And then buzzers came in. So the epoxy buzzer sort of made an entrance to Arab fishing. And that was something I remember my dad just really excelled at. And I learned a lot about that.
Yeah. Were you guys fishing that under under an indicator, or was it just...
Generally not. Generally, we would fish a team of 3 or 4 buzzers.
Okay. Like, and the buzzers are the chironomids. Those are the chironomids.
Yeah, exactly. The epoxy buzzers, epoxy chironomids.
Yeah.
So we would fish them on a long leader straight off a floating line and basically fish them static. So, you're just staying in touch with the flies and fishing by feel. And I think a lot of the fellas back there now are using indicators and varying styles of fishing it. But and that's something that I've certainly taken into New Zealand fishing as well. A lot of that nymphing and lake fishing, which is like the lakes here are somewhat overlooked by tourist anglers. We fishermen love the lakes for sure, but the tourist anglers don't generally see too much of the lakes. But I've always adored the lakes over here, and it's something that I've really brought into my guiding over here too.
Nice. So that's awesome. I mean, you started out, grew up in a great fishing location, Ireland. And did you guys ever do anything? Did you try any like salmon fishing? Did you ever get into that, or was it mostly brown trout?
I did. I worked as a gilly or a guide, whatever, on Loch Ina and also on Ballynahinch River. So there were 2 quite iconic salmon and sea trout fisheries in the west of Ireland. And I guided on those from 18 till quite recently, really. Oftentimes I'd go home when I would be on my early years of exploring the world of fly fishing. Every time I'd go back home, I would kind of pick up where I left off in the guiding scene. So yeah, I spent years working on those fisheries. So I have a reasonably good background in salmon and sea trout fishing too. But unfortunately, when I started fly fishing back in when I was 12, that was around the demise of the sea trout fishing in Ireland.
Oh, Roy. What year would that have been when that collapsed?
It was late 80s into the early 90s.
That's exactly, that's over, out in the U.S., the steelhead, different species, of course, but, we saw that too in the early 90s. There was a big, and it must have been just kind of that was a worldwide ocean condition kind of thing.
Yeah, well, in Ireland, it coincided exactly with the advent of salmon farming in the west of Ireland. And those open pen farms, there were just huge infestations of sea lice around the cage.
Is that what it is? So you have these farms and you have all these kind of invasive species that are clinging to the fish, and they kill them? Is that kind of what it does? Or
Yeah, well, the lice that are in the seas around Ireland are naturally occurring there. They're native lice, and it was unusual to get lice on a fresh run salmon. To see a few lice on a salmon was actually quite a good thing. It sort of knew it was fresh from the sea, just a few. But then when the salmon farms came along, it was an easy source of food for the lice, and they clung on to this easy source of food. Their populations exploded because of the easy source of food. Then the salmon farmers had to come up with a way of getting them off the farm salmon. So in a nutshell, they just hammered the wild native salmonids year after year. And within 3 years, we saw our sea trout and salmon get reduced. Particularly the sea trout got reduced almost to the point of extinction. In fact, they're gone from quite a lot of the fisheries in the west of Ireland. They're just hanging on by a thread on a few. So it was incredibly sad. Like what we've lost in the west of Ireland, in fact, not just the west, in quite a lot of Ireland, what we've lost is, it's an absolute travesty. And that, when I, like that first story I mentioned about Declan Ridge and Dad going off fishing for sea trout in the evenings, that's gone. That's simply gone.
Oh, Roy, so this affected the sea trout too?
Oh, they're gone. Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I mean, if that quality of fishing was still in Ireland, there's every chance I would still be there.
Oh, no kidding. Is that what you moving over when you're 24?
I wanted to travel, I wanted to see the world, and I wanted to fly fish in other places. So I think I would have come here regardless. But if there was more to Ireland's fishing, then I could quite easily have gone back there and lived there after I did my exploring. But I mean, I couldn't swear to that. But like the fishing in Ireland, I love it and I still love it. But it's not as varied for me as it is over here. So with that additional sea trout and salmon fishing, if it was good, that extra variety might have been enough to keep me there,
Right. But you don't, the one thing in New Zealand, you don't have our Atlantic salmon, right?
We don't have Atlantics. They were stocked here many years ago, and and up until relatively recent times, they did happen to pop up here and there. But as far as I'm aware, there's none anymore. We do have king salmon.
Oh, you have king?
Yeah, we do. And in fact, we do have good runs around the South Island. And good fishing for those.
And have you fished for those, like with the fly?
Not really. I've caught quite a lot of them on lakes. There's a lot of them are landlocked on some of our big lakes, and I've caught a lot of them there. They're small, generally up to about 3 pounds.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah. Maybe talk a little bit about New Zealand itself. We've had, like I said, a few podcast episodes where we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe give us a broad picture of where you are, where you do your guiding, and then just maybe spread out into bigger New Zealand in general.
Sure. So I'm in a small town called Alexandra in the south of the South Island. From here, I've got good trout fishing in all directions. It's very central, so it's quite a good base for me as a fishing guide. And so the most of my fishing is for brown trout. But on most of the rivers I fish, or at least on a lot of the rivers I fish, rainbows are also present. So you don't turn them down when they arrive. I love them as well, but brown trout seem to be what makes up most of my target species. So it's for me, it's mostly river fishing, but I fish a lot of lakes too. I adore the lakes. I really do. Coming from the lakes background, I just love the lakes. So I do spend a lot of time on the lakes, but it is mostly rivers and it's mostly sight fishing. So you're basically, what I would do on a normal day out, I'd leave here around 8 a.m. That gets me to the river around about 9. And that's usually a good time to arrive. Because it's a sight fishery, you need the daylight hours to get the most out of the day. So there's not too much point going out very early in the morning because you won't have the advantage of the sun to help you see the fish. So 9 o'clock is a good start time, and then we generally fish right through till about 5. And after that, then it's usually a good full day of fishing. And in that time, you spend the day steadily walking upstream, looking for fish. But sometimes you see a bit of water that just screams fish. You may not be able to see one, but you certainly don't turn your back on blind fishing opportunities. It's very important to be able to read water well and blind fish water as well as sight fishing. And then over the course of the day, we would probably cover between 4 and 6 kilometers of river on a normal day out. And then, I always I think to myself, a good day, if you get 10 or 12 good opportunities to fish every day, you'll regularly get a lot more. Some days you'll get 20 or 30 great.
And these are, I've seen some of the photos on your Instagram. Some of these are some big brown trout.
Yeah, they are. The average fish you're targeting would be around 4 pounds, 3 to 4 pounds. You don't get too excited about 3 pound trout, but certainly I like to try and target slightly bigger fish. So I like to go after 4s, 5s, and 6s. And, I've had about maybe between myself and my clients, I think I've seen about 20 double figure fish in the net. You do see some of the real big lads too.
Right. What does that look like? So talk about the sight fishing. You're walking the banks, you see a fish, talk about how you get in position to, present to that fish.
Yeah. So in a river scenario, if you're lucky, when you find a fish, he'll be on station. So he'll be in one position, usually just swinging left and right, maybe moving forwards and back a little bit. That's kind of the ideal scenario because that gives you time. He's on station.
On station meaning he's feeding and moving around?
Exactly. He's on station. He's in one position feeding.
Yeah. And that's the difference between, as opposed to say if he was on the bottom doing nothing, then he's probably not feeding. Is that case?
Exactly. Or as opposed to a fish that might be cruising around a pool, in which case that's a very, very different dynamic because you have to chase that fish or try and intercept him. But a fish that's on station gives you time. You can basically up behind the fish, you can consider your position. You can consider the best fly. You can consider what depth you need to present. So you can work out how far you need to lead the fish by, and you have time to make all those decisions. So that's the dream shot, basically. So, and then you get yourself into position, you make your cast. Now, one thing about New Zealand is if you can make that cast in the first second, really the first cast is best.
Oh, really? That's your best shot?
Without a shadow of a doubt, that's your best shot. So if you can consistently make that first cast well, you'll do very well in New Zealand. If it's taken you like 4 or 5 or 6 casts to put the fly where it needs to be, that's not going to bode well. I mean, basically every time you cast to a fish that does not land in the right place makes the fish just a little bit more aware that something's up. So 5 or 6 casts later, that fish and sometimes you can see them just get a little bit stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. They stop. Or spook.
Are these fish for the most? Are they getting a lot of pressure? There are lots of people angling for them.
It depends where you fish. I try to fish rivers that are not being fished too frequently. The rivers certainly get fished. There's really nothing available that sees no pressure. I mean, even sea fishing. You're still flying into rivers that see anglers every now and again. Not often, right? Every now and again.
And are these spring creeks?
Not necessarily. Mostly not. Mostly just freestone rivers.
Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters is your go-to resource for swung fly techniques, two-handed casting, and anadromous fish. Find out why Waters West has built a cult-like following around their fly tying materials and why they are the go-to resource for the OP and beyond. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/waterswest right now to check in with Ed and Kyle and get all geared up to get on the water. Imagine a place where dreams of perfect cast don't break the bank. Welcome to Jackson Hole Fly Company. Dive into a superior online fly shop experience that offers premium fly fishing gear with exceptional quality at affordable prices. Why choose quality and affordability when you can have both? Our dedication, crafting top-tier products without the top-tier price tags. So gear up for your next adventure and let your wallet breathe easy. Jackson Hole Fly Company, reeling in quality, casting out high costs. Visit them at jacksonholeflycompany.com. So, and then talk a little about what you're using. Are we talking streamers, nymphs? How are you presenting to these fish?
With a fish on station, you'd almost certainly target him with a nymph. I like to use a dry dropper, particularly from November. Well, actually, from the very start, I like to fish a dry fly as my indicator because a fish can come up and take a dry here any time of year. But if I see a fish swinging, odds are he's going to take a nymph and not a dry. So I'll put the emphasis on the nymph. And, I'll take the surprise if he comes up for the dry, but I'm expecting him to take the nymph because that's what he's doing. He's nymphing. So I just work out the depth, work out the fly, and then make the presentation cast.
Yep, and get it. And then how do you know, what's it look like when he takes it? How do you know he's taking it?
Well, it's just the dry gets pulled under.
Yeah, you're just watching the dry.
Yeah, you're watching the dry. Now, I'll also watch the fish. If I can see the fish's mouth clearly, I won't look at the dry at all. I'll just watch the fish's mouth. And the moment I see that takedown.
When your fly's in we had that same situation happen. We were fishing a spring creek in Virginia, and I haven't fished a lot of spring creeks, but these fish, it was super clear. If you could see the mouth, you could actually see them, and if your fly's in the general direction, you kind of set, and there you go. Because sometimes they wouldn't even take down the dry. You wouldn't even see it. It's so subtle.
But that's a very, very regular occurrence here. Like the dry as an indicator. Well, it's just that. It's an indicator. It's not a fact.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're watching that indicator, but it doesn't, you'll often mistakes if you go by the indicator alone. If you have something better to go by, then use it. And if you can see the fish's mouth, I will do. I mean, to be honest, I've sometimes one eye on the fish and one eye on his mouth, and I'm trying to, just watching the whole scenario. And sometimes I'm not even sure what I struck on. And, it's a common thing too, guiding. I'm watching the fish. I'll call the strike. Client doesn't strike. And he tells me the dry never moved.
Right.
I'd say, well, I wasn't, and I try to explain, but I do try and explain this at the start of the day. I may see something that you don't see. So if I call the strike, just go for it.
Yeah, said it. That's cool. So this is, New Zealand's obviously, you have lots of fishing opportunities. Maybe describe that a little more on, where you are. You're in the south of the South Island. Is there brown trout? Are people fishing all around New Zealand? Maybe describe a little more general. Are you fishing other areas besides the south area?
Yeah, so basically the regions that are close to me are Mackenzie country, which is to the north, and that's a lakes district, also with some great rivers. There's the west coast, which is really wild, remote kind of country. Southland, a lot of fishermen down there, but a lot of rivers and a lot of superb rivers. And then where I am is Otago. Once again, there's a lot of lovely rivers here, very varied. You can chase big fish, you can chase sea trout, you can chase. You can get good numbers of smaller brown trout, or you can go for the quality and look for your 4s, 5s, 6s, 7-pound brown.
Yeah, and are the sea trout? Those are the brown trout that are going to the ocean and coming back.
Yeah, there's a couple of options not too far from me where I can target those, particularly especially late in the season. And they've been that I've really adored over the years, because they're a true sea trout like what we had in Ireland, only tended to be quite a bit bigger. They tend to run anywhere between 3, 4, right up to 15 pounds.
Oh yeah. So they're going to get bigger than your resident fish for the most part.
They can do, not always, but like their size range is very varied. So some of the really successful ones at sea will get right up to some very, very big sizes. Now, I've only had one over 10, and that was a 12. So like they're not by any means common, but they are there. But they're stunning fish. Quite different to the browns. They look different from the moment you see them.
Oh yeah. Are you fishing them differently?
Not generally. When they're on their migration, they tend to just turn up in very similar lies to brown trout. So you just fish them the same way as you would for brown trout. But late in the season, they tend to pod up in pools. And when they're podded up in pools, I fish them quite differently. Yeah, usually a long leader, single nymph, let it down into the pod, or fish them with streamers. So it does vary a little.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to touch the base maybe on what it would look like if we were to set up, maybe a trip down there with you. But I want to touch on the Sexyloops a little bit, because that's what I was talking. I had Paul on and we were chatting, and you've written a lot there. I just want to provide that resource, right? You have a lot of talk about that, what you do with Sexyloops.
So I've been involved in Sexyloops for 20 years, I guess. I've been with Sexyloops almost from the beginning. Well, not quite. I think Paul set it up in 1998, I think it was, and I've been involved in it since about 2003, I would say. So yeah, quite a long time now. More than that is more than 20 years. So it started for me. I met Paul. He was filming one of his early fishing films, and I was fascinated by all this, and I was mad to help, and I did. And I went off and I just did a little bit of filming with him for a couple of days. And from then we just hit it off and became friends, and we fished together all the time. So every season I used to have these ideas that, okay, next year I won't go to New Zealand, I'll go to Cuba, or I'll go somewhere different. It was like autopilot. I'd have enough money saved, and I would just ring some travel company, and I'd have my ticket back to New Zealand again. Yeah. But a lot of it was to do with Paul, because Paul said, yeah, I'm going back to New Zealand this year. And I just couldn't imagine him there on his own and me not some of the action. And he was such good. I mean, he was great fun to fish with. Did you
cover fish all over New Zealand?
Yeah, well, we covered a lot. We covered all of the South Island. We never fished the North Island together, but we fished every region in the South Island.
What is it about New Zealand? I mean, obviously it's this destination. I think a lot of people, still in the United States probably haven't been there, but I think everybody wants to go there. What is it about New Zealand that's so special? Why is it, so unique, such the place to be?
Well, there's great freedom here. when I started coming to New Zealand, you'd buy one license, and with that license, you can go where you want. You can fish anywhere. It's all covered.
And is it public water? Public water everywhere?
It's all public water. Yeah, it's all public water.
Oh, it is. So you can fish anywhere or go as far as you want.
Yeah, as long as you can get to a river by a public access, then once you're on the river, you can, for the most part, go as long as you want. It's called the Queen's Chain. 22 yards of either bank is public access, as long as you can get to it via a public access. You can't just walk through somebody's land without asking for permission.
Sure.
But once you can get to the river, then you can go.
You're good. That's awesome.
Now, there are some rivers that don't have Queen's Chain, so you do need to be a little bit careful. You can't just assume everything is open, but the vast majority is. But it's worth just having a quick check. But that freedom was very. That's what Paul loved. That's what I loved. And together we would just go hard. We would fish all over South Island.
Just fish and camp, or what were you guys doing? Staying?
Just fish and camp. So
yeah.
we basically lived on beans and potatoes, campfires,
awesome.
and fishing. You see, Paul was a vegetarian, so it was easier not to eat meat, just to keep things simple around the cooker, which was basically we had a pot where we would cook beans and potatoes in it every night.
There you go.
I came up with lots of different ways of cooking potatoes. My lemon pepper, olive oil wrapped on potatoes, wrapped in tinfoil into the campfire. That was magic.
There you go. What'd you guys eat for breakfast?
Usually leftovers.
And then for lunch, same thing.
Yeah, just whatever. We kind of lived on noodles a lot of the time too. Noodles seem to sustain us pretty well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you basically did that with quite a few years, and eventually you're like, hey, why not just move down here? I'm loving this anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I did. I mean, so I spent 9 seasons traveling over from Ireland, and I would fish most of every season. So usually between 3 and 6 months of every season I would come over for. Paul would be similar to that. So every time I'd meet up with Paul, we would just fish hard together, and then I'd go back to Ireland, go back to my gillying jobs, and then I'd be back here again the next season.
There you go. And what time of year were you hitting it?
I'd normally get over here in November, sometimes earlier, sometimes October, and I would then stay until usually the end of March or April.
Oh, wow. Oh, so you're there a long time.
So depending on when I would arrive, but I would always try and stay for at least 3 months, usually closer to 6 months on every one of those visits.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was amazing. I mean, so over those years, I covered a lot of the country. I met some great people, that really helped me with the guiding business once I set that up. In fact, if it wasn't for some of those people that I met in those early exploring years in New Zealand, guiding might not have been quite such. I may not have been able to get into it quite so easily. I met a lot of good friends who were guides themselves, and they were happy to help me out and to put work my way. They knew me, and we became friends, so they helped me out.
It's awesome.
So very thankful for that. It was really good.
Are there quite a few guides in New Zealand?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of the NZPFGA, which is the New Zealand Professional Fishing Guides Association. And in this organization, I think there's 140 guides. Now they're spread over the 2 islands. So the main centers will have guides. Yeah, I mean, there's not an absolute heap of us.
Yeah,
when you consider 140 spread over the whole country, it's but it seems to work. There seems to be enough for the demand.
Yeah, for the demand. I'm thinking the size of New Zealand. I don't even know how big is it. I always compare things, obviously, to the United States, but it's a pretty decent size.
Yeah, I think it's 2,000 kilometers long, the whole lot of it. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And then east to west, it takes me about 3 hours to drive to the west coast and about 2 hours to drive to the east coast.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's 2 hours a drive from west to east.
Probably take you 4 or 5 hours to drive right across the South Island at the widest point.
Yeah, at the widest point, 4 or 5. Okay. Yeah. That gives us a little perspective. Cool. So going back to Sexyloops, so you have basically blog. I mean, if somebody wanted to read about your kind of journeys, right? You got all that there? That's
right. So my blog, I've been writing that since the start with Paul. I think I've been writing the blog for about 15 years. I've maybe written about 350 entries.
Wow.
It's not necessarily how to or telling you how to fish. It's usually just my observations on the river, followed by a lot of photos. And I try to write one about once every month. So there's a pile of information there. And, I mean, sometimes you sit down and write and you can feel quite inspired and you can have something to say, something that is interesting and I like how it goes. Other times, you sit down and not much comes out and it's not great. But I imagine it's typical for anyone who writes regularly.
Yep. Some's good, some's not good, right?
Exactly.
That's part of it. That's part of it. That's the right. Awesome. So that is a good resource. We'll put a link in the show notes to that so people can check it out.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. I mean, it's a massive resource, and I think it's been quite a big part of Sexyloops over the last 15 years. It's always there. It's very regular. It may not be as I'd like to get them out more frequently, but I do my best, and it's consistently there anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. You had a TV show, right, a while back that you were a part of?
Yep. A friend of mine over here, his name is Nick Reygaert. He makes a lot of films, makes a lot of fly fishing films. He made a series recently called Pure Fly NZ, and myself and my good mate Jeff Forsey teamed up, and we made one episode for each series. There was 5 series, and we did an episode in each one. So that was good fun.
Yeah. So you just cover different areas that you fish regularly?
Yeah, we did. We did a fair bit of lake stuff actually in those, and
nice.
A lot of exploratory stuff and some late season stuff. It wasn't the mainstream New Zealand fishing. Pretty much all our episodes were a little bit kind of unusual in that regard. It wasn't the stereotypical New Zealand fishing, which I think made them really interesting. The whole thing, Pure Fly NZ, was quite an amazing piece of work by Nick, and I think it's all available on YouTube.
Perfect. Yeah, Pure Fly. Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll try to track down that as well. Cool. Well, let's try to paint a picture. We have our travel program. We've done a lot in more North America, obviously that's but we're trying to expand out. So I'd like to paint a picture for people like, okay, if they wanted to put a trip together in New Zealand, what would that look like? So maybe let's just start with the timing. You mentioned November, but if we're sitting here, maybe we're going to bring over a group of people, a small group to go there. When would you recommend would be a good time to head over there for, say, brown trout or really anything?
It really doesn't matter. Every month has something to offer.
Yeah. Every month of the year, 12 months out of the year?
I'm not talking about the whole year. I'm talking about every month of the regular season.
Of the regular season. Yeah.
Yeah. Winter fishing is good, but I wouldn't really recommend traveling around the world for it. In general, now, there are some great winter options, but we'll talk about the regular season. I think it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
Well, for the regular fishing season on the rivers, the season opens in October and finishes at the end of May. Now, there's a little bit of wiggle room on that. The November opening rivers generally close in May, and the October opening rivers usually close in April, the end of April. Anyway, so that's the season. So the regular season is from beginning of October till the end of May. So October can be superb. November, December, it really doesn't matter. Like I said, every month has something unique to offer. The most popular months of the year are usually January, February, but to be honest, they can be the hardest months because sometimes, particularly around here, it gets very hot. Rivers can get low, and there's also, that's the time when there is most pressure on the waters.
Why is that? Just because it's cold?
I think it's just an assumption.
Yeah.
I think it's just an assumption people have that the best time to be in New Zealand is in summer for fishing. It's not true. It is good. I mean, January, February is good, and particularly on bigger rivers that stay cold, there, the fishing can be magic, but you are going to be dealing with angling pressure, and that seems to be an increasing thing here. So, I guess it wouldn't be bad advice to avoid those high summer months and, fish the earlier stuff like October, November, December.
Which is more like the spring?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit cooler. Not quite so many people around.
That's it. Okay, so that's a good time. So maybe we're shooting for November or something like that which is a good time because November, December, it's starting to get cold and kind of nasty over in the U.S. anyways. So that would be a good time to head over.
Yeah, look, that's a really lovely time or time locally too. It's superb. It's hard to beat November, December.
And I noticed on your website, you've got a few different options, kind of, road trips, day trips. You got like a heli trip. You got some other stuff. What would be a good, I guess people are coming over, they're making a long flight from the U.S., then they're probably going to be staying there probably, my guess is a week or longer. What's a good time to be there if you're heading over, like a length of the trip?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to come over and you're going to have, 7 days, depends on what you want to do. I mean, the more time, the better. In my opinion, if you're going to come all this way, you might as well stay for a month. So, but if you wanted to get a guide, well, I suppose get as many days as you can afford, really. I think having 3 or 4 days with a guide at the very start of your trip, if you're here for, let's say, a month or whatever period, will set you on the right path. And try and vary it a bit. I mean, I certainly would if I have people coming over for 4 days and they're trying to set themselves up for the month ahead. I'll try and cover a lot of the stuff they'll need to know for, whatever eventuality they'll face, whether it's high water, floods, maybe adapting and going to the lakes, or, fishing all waters, fishing big waters, fishing for big fish, small fish, streamers. Try and cover a lot of the bases. And then when they go off on their own, they've got a good base of knowledge and they can usually put it.
That is cool. Okay. And so if you're heading over there, let's just say we're going to be chasing, want to find some big brown trout. What would be the recommended trip? Would you plan it differently if we really wanted to find some of the bigger fish?
Yeah. So big fish is interesting. Well, first of all, it depends what you consider big.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes when I hear that in an email, I just assume that people want to catch double figure fish. But as I've learned over the years, that most people's perception of a big fish is, 5, 6, 7 pounds. And that's
common.
I'm not saying it's common. I mean, yes, they're there. And if you have a week of fishing, I really would expect you'll certainly get 5s, you'll get your 6s, and hopefully get a 7 or maybe better.
Right.
But to come over here and with the intention of catching a double figure fish, to be honest, that's an unreasonable expectation.
Yeah, that's tough.
Number one, there's not that many rivers that have enough of those really big fish that you can expect to catch one. And even on those rivers where they exist, if somebody comes over and they really want to catch a double, I'll still only take them to those rivers maybe once.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's the thing. I mean, size, yeah, I think if you're doing this trip, I mean, the whole experience is what it's about, and if you're catching, any fish, really, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that'd be great. You know what I mean?
I think it comes down to, managing expectations. I think on your first trip to New Zealand, certainly I'm never offended if someone says to me that they want to catch a big fish. That's fine, and I'll do my best. But I'll just try and manage expectations. Where there are big fish around, it's not the be all and end all over here. Like sometimes if you really target those big fish, you actually forego the fishing. It becomes about a hunt. We're
putting together this White River trip with Chad Johnson down there in Arkansas. And I asked him that same thing. I said, hey, when should we come there? And he's like, all right, we want to go for some of these big with the streamers. He's like, man, you got to be ready because we're doing this thing with Project Healing Waters and it's a program. So we're having some other people. And he's like, you got to be prepared for this. I mean, you might go and not even touch anything, right?
Yeah.
It's not, as opposed to, say, you go in the fall, you might have a bunch of opportunities to catch lots of rainbows and stuff. So that's the thing, is like, do you want to deal with some pain because it's not easy to get giant fish? And I think that's what you're saying, right? If you're going to try to find a 10 pounder, that's not going to be easy.
It's the same. It's the very same. And I mean, if that is literally the goal, to catch a 10 pound, then you will be foregoing the smaller fish, because the only way you're going to get those double figure fish is to fish waters where they exist.
What would you recommend? That you mentioned a little bit, like being diversifying, like maybe get a day of still water, a day. Talk about the rivers we might be fishing to break it up a little bit.
What I love to do for my clients is give a diverse week of fishing. So what I usually do, let's say a 7-day trip, that's becoming a very increasingly popular block of time for my regulars. They come over for 7 days. In that 7 days, what I normally do is spend 3 days fishing locally, and then we go on the road for the other 4. So they book their accommodation locally for a few days. We fish the local options for the first few days, and they're lovely, lovely options. There's kind of medium-sized rivers, small rivers. There's also some magnificent lake options. And I'll usually do that. So let's say the first 3 days, we'll do one of the lakes, usually sight fishing on the lake.
Oh, wow. Sight fishing on the lake.
Oh, yeah. I'll explain that in a minute,
Nice.
Actually. This is something very unknown from a tourist angler point of view. But so we do a day on the lakes, a day on a small stream, a day on a medium river, and then we would go on the road. And I tend not to book accommodations, even though it's a little bit risky, but I always seem to manage to find somewhere. Because the reason I don't book accommodation in advance is because I want to go where the fishing is going to be best. I don't want to book a week in Southland way out in advance, and then when that week comes, it's blown out, everything is wrecked or whatever. So what I do is I try and keep that 4-day block very open, and I look at the weather then reasonably close to the time, and make a decision based on that. So we may go to Southland, we may go to Mackenzie country, we may go to the West Coast, wherever I kind of feel would be the best place for 4 days. And then you get to see a bit of the country, you get on the road, you get to have a look around, and again we just mix it up then again with river, maybe another lake. So over 7 days, we might do 2 lake days, 5 river days,
Yep.
something like that.
Wow, that's really cool. And is the fishing, you mentioned the sight fishing, is that pretty much what you're doing mostly? Are all the streams very similar?
Yeah, it's mostly sight fishing. Pretty much everywhere I go for guiding, it's sight fishing. And then, there'll always be some parts of the river where you'll blind fish, but it's mostly sighting. Yeah, mostly sighting. Again, that's conditions dependent. You may get a river, if the rivers are high and dirty after some rain, then you just have to go pulling streamers. Sometimes you just have to do whatever it takes to get it. You don't get it's not all sunshine rainbows, or whatever. It's sometimes it's hard going.
Yeah.
And just have to adapt to the conditions. So it's so when sight fishing is impossible, you just do other things. Like problem blind fishing. I love to figure it out, whatever the case may be. So if you cannot do what you like to do, well, you just have to do something else that
works. What about dry flies? Are you getting any dry fly action?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, dry. Absolutely.
There's some pretty decent like hatches and all that?
The best hatches are late season. The best mayfly hatches are late season, like April. Although you get some decent hatches in October as well. So the cooler months you have the best hatches. But then in summer, so January, February, even though I kind of said that they're in many ways the toughest months, they're also the best months for terrestrial fishing. So your cicada fishing and hoppers, beetles and stuff. So that you can have some magnificent dry fly in summer. Big dries. That it can be superb. So absolutely, the dry fly fishing is definitely always on the cards. Really, always on the cards. I mean, and even though you get the best hatches early and late, there's generally a trickle of some fly every day. Every day on the river, you'll see a few mayflies coming off. You might just get a little localized hatch where you get some fly trickling down and there's a fish or two up feeding on them. So you change tactics, put on a little dry and target those. So, dry fly fishing is always on the cards.
What is the first thing you do in the morning? For me, it's heating up a kettle and pouring it over Angler's coffee. That's how I start my day. Angler's Coffee roasts some of the finest beans on the market, and every bag you purchase supports the fish species we all love. Joe at Anglers ensures every batch is roasted and ships within 48 hours for maximum freshness. And this month, the Woolies blend is still my favorite. Joe crafts this flawless dark roast that jumpstarts every day. Angler's Coffee has a blend for every taste, a roast sampler, and options for any brewing method you prefer. If you want to support fish conservation and enjoy exceptional coffee, now's the time to try it and sign up for a subscription. Visit wetflyswing.com/anglers to get your Angler's Coffee today. That's Anglers, Anglers. Make a change today. Where are your clients, or where are they coming from?
Most of my clients are from Australia.
Oh, okay.
I've got quite a few American clients and a few Korean clients, and I always get a few Irish lads because those that know me from home and that, and rest of the world.
Yeah. Have you fished Australia?
I did. I fished Australia quite a lot.
Oh wow! Is it quite different than New Zealand?
Well, myself and Paul fished there years ago, and we spent a lot of time up in the Northern Territory. We fished with a guy called Graham Williams up there. Fantastic fella, brilliant guide. Became a good friend to both of us, and he took us out and showed us how to fish up there, and we had some really great fishing for a range of species, queenfish and trevallies and goldens, and giants, and all sorts of weird species too, like little tarpon and sutton grunters and archer. I remember Paul got an archer fish. That was pretty cool. And we didn't. I mean, some of the best fishing there was in the billabongs, catching Saratoga and barramundi and that, and surface poppers and streamers and
So it's totally different. The fishing, there's not as much of the trout opportunity.
It was completely different, and we loved it. But I also spent a lot of time in Tasmania over there, and Paul as well. We fished there together. In fact, one thing your listeners might get a kick out of is on one of the seasons where myself and Paul fished together, we were in the throes of putting together a TV show for Discovery Channel, which sadly didn't work out. I remember having a meeting with one of the guys in Discovery Channel, and he said, "Can you keep up the intensity?" Because we had made a pilot show, and he said, "Can you keep this intensity?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely, we can keep this intensity." And Paul said, "Let's just prove to them that we can keep the intensity." So we decided we'd make our own TV show. So we filmed everything we did for 6 months, and every 2 weeks or so, we would put something together and put it out on YouTube. And that whole thing is documented on if you go to, it's on sexyloops.tv.
Oh, okay.
I think it's called New Zealand and Australia or something.
Yeah.
It's basically myself and Paul fishing together. It's all our own editing, so it's a little bit kind of raw.
Yeah.
And but I think we did a pretty good job. And it's again, we're not telling you how to fish, and try to leave the egos behind.
So you did that in preparation of the Discovery Channel?
We did it initially. We did it to prove to the guys in Discovery Channel that we would be able to keep up the intensity.
And what do they mean by intensity? They meant like what?
Well, what they meant was we made a show, and it was pretty energetic, and there was a lot going on. And in fact, I think so much stuff happened that they couldn't even use all of it.
You mean just like what? Like just crazy stuff, fish and
Great. Well, yeah. We used to do. I mean, Paul, for example, Paul had this old truck, and I had this old boat that kept breaking down, and Paul's truck kept breaking down. But there was one time we were driving, and Paul was towing my boat with an old Hilux, and we're driving along anyway, and Paul's truck starts going red hot, like the engine has gone screaming hot, and we pull up anyway and lift up the bonnet, and you could see like the heat shield from the exhaust was glowing red,
man.
like the engine, it was really cooking.
Jeez.
So the production team had a rental Prado, and didn't have a tow bar, but we had somewhere to go. We were trying to get over the Crown Range, and Paul's truck was no way in hell was it going to get over the Crown Range towing a boat. So we got this idea that we would tie Paul's truck to the hook on the back of the rental Land Cruiser. It wasn't even a tow bar, and I probably should tell you the story. So we tied Paul's truck to the back of the Land Cruiser, and then so we start driving up the Crown Range, which is a really, really steep, windy, dangerous hill.
Oh man, wow! So you're towing a truck and a boat behind it.
So yeah, so there's a Prado without a tow bar, towing a Hilux, towing a boat. And so we start driving up the hill, and we got up the hill about 100 meters, and there's a sign saying not recommended for towing vehicles.
Right.
And here we are towing two vehicles.
And it is a Range Rover's towing everything.
It was a Toyota Prado.
What is a Prado? Is that a pickup?
Prado is like a small Land Cruiser.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, like a truck or not truck, but yeah,
4-wheel drive.
4-wheel drive. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a power of, they're good jokes, but anyway, it got us over the hill, and I remember we had our own little camera, and we were filming what we were doing, and I remember the two of us standing up in the front of Paul's truck, the heads out of the sunroof,
right,
was filming the Prado in front of us, and then turning around filming the boat.
And is it the Discovery guys pulling you in the other car? They're pulling
wow.
It's
the Discovery team that are pulling over the hill.
That's so good. You guys are all jacked up.
Oh man, it was such fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. And we got over the hill, we got down the other side, and we got to where we needed to go. And then, and then on the way back from where we were next, my boat broke down right out in the middle of the lake. Yeah. Anyway, there was so much random stuff like that used to keep happening that they simply couldn't put it. I mean, they couldn't put that in the episode anyway because it'd be illegal. But that sort of stuff was happening all the time. So I guess when they said to us, "Can you keep the intensity?"
Yeah, that's
what they meant, and that yes, we could, and we did. But anyway, it didn't get picked up by Discovery Channel in the end, which was sad. That was going to be a life-changing thing for us, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, is that tow video on the Sexyloops?
God, no, because that was their camera.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that video footage has been.
Yeah. Oh man.
Probably deleted.
Car problems, man, are like, that's a tough thing, especially when you're on a trip for fishing.
Yeah. Because
something happens and you're like, man, now I can't even get to the fishing trip, right? That's the bummer, but that's cool. Well, good. Well, let's take it out of here. I got a little bit of a segment. This is like our travel segment program, and today this is presented by Helena, Montana, one of our presenting sponsors. We're doing a trip on the Missouri River that's coming up here, and we've been doing some stuff. So we're going to give a shout out to Helena and the good stuff they're going. But the question for you here is, we've been talking about New Zealand, Ireland. Are there any places around the world you're thinking about you'd like to get out to, that you haven't been to? Any big bucket list trips for you?
Well, it's fun. So years ago, I wanted to go everywhere. But the older I get, I don't know. I'd love to go to other places, but realistically, because I have family back in Ireland, anytime I have enough money to travel, it's to go back and my family at home.
Right.
So the only other thing that makes sense to me now, if I get a window that I can travel, it's to go and hang out with Paul in Malaysia.
Oh, yeah.
And go after those. I've been over there twice.
Oh, you have? So you've been down there?
Yeah. It's like I just listened to Paul's podcast.
Yeah.
you, and I heard him, talking about it, and I it's an incredible fishery.
Right. It's hard, right? It's super hard.
It's really hard, but to me, that doesn't detract from it at all. I think anyone who's spent their life in fly fishing, or it's very much suited to people who are over the need to catch numbers of fish.
Yeah.
If that's your aim, then it's not for you. But if you understand what fishing is all about, and you want a real challenge, then go there. And it's possible. It's not like it's impossible. You can do it. I mean, I did it. I caught a snakehead and 2 gourami on my first trip. Yeah. And then on my second trip, I didn't get any. I made a mess of one, actually. I trout struck. So it was totally my fault. But I had a few other opportunities. It's funny. Like, there were a few shots that I felt like they were good shots, but I turned to Paul and I could just see by his face that
not quite.
It wasn't good enough,
right.
And I thought, well, that's fair enough.
How close do you have to get it to those fish?
Well, number one, you have to get probably within a foot of the fish and also on the right side of the fish. So if the fish is coming up and takes a gulp of air and he's traveling left to right, well, you must be on the right side of that rise. So that you can be close enough, but on the wrong side is no good. So you have to be so that when the fish, because if you put it on his tail, it's behind him, and where he may react, it's much better if you can get it on the right side of the. So basically, you've got 2 seconds to put it there. Yeah,
that's it. It's like, boom, you got to get it on and get it right on it. Yeah. I had heard this tip on casting recently was, you think about the pie plate, right? Getting with the pie plate. But the tip was, don't try to get to a pie plate. Try to get it to that little tiny speck of a thing, right? Like, get more exact. And the more exact you get, the better, it just makes you better. Is that something that you like? Any tips you have for casting to get really, exact on the spot?
Yeah, well, just look exactly where you want the fly to go. That was my advice to casting accuracy. And the reason I say that is because that's obvious. If you're standing in a field and you're casting at targets, then obviously you're looking at the target. That's where the fly goes. But when you're on a river fishing for trout, it's a very common mistake people make, and I still make now and again, I have to say, is that I'm looking at the fish when I need to be looking ahead of the fish. I need to be looking where the fly to go. Not if you look at the fish, so often you just drop the fly right on top of the fish, and that's the wrong thing. It spooks the fish. So yeah, just look where you want the fly to land.
Okay, good. And so thinking about brown trout sight fishing, maybe give us a few tips that you would be giving a client. If we were over there or somebody was fishing with you, what would you be telling them to have a better chance at hooking, some of these brown trout?
I suppose the first thing would be, prior to the trip, would be a little bit of practice. Try and dial in good short range, accurate casting. It's generally quite short. You're usually fishing inside 40 feet. And so, get good at that before you ever get on the river. So that when you are standing behind, I mean, for some people, a 6 or a 7 pound trout is going to be the biggest trout they've ever seen. And, buck fever sets in. Yep. So, I guess another piece of advice would be to just relax, try and relax.
Right. Because you're going to see these big fish.
Yeah, you can see them. Use what you've practiced and...
trust yourself. Trust that you can do it.
Exactly. And don't look at the fish. Look ahead of the fish.
Yeah, ahead of the fish. Yeah, exactly.
Look where you want the fly to land, not at the fish.
What are some of the gear items you use, like for rod reels? Do you use a lot of brands from over there, or maybe talk about that a little bit?
Well, I use a 6-weight most of the time. In fact, I use Paul's.
Paul's.
Excellent.
Yeah,
that's my go-to trout rod.
Are those kind of like fast action, medium action? What are those like?
Yeah, they're a pretty fast action, powerful rod. I mean, they're designed Paul designed them with New Zealand in mind. So it's definitely my rod of choice for New Zealand, the 9-foot 6-weight Sexyloops hot torpedo. In general, a 6-weight is what you want here. A lot of people fish 5s, but I find with the 5-weight, you often need to up the ante. Sometimes you need to throw heavy nymphs. Sometimes you need to throw streamers. A 6-weight just gives you a little bit more versatility. Plus, these fish are quite big, and it's not like snakehead where you're pointing the rod at the fish. You're obviously playing these fish with the rod, so a 6-weight rod give you a little bit more to stick it to them when you need to. So I use a 6-weight. Fly lines I don't get too excited about. Any 6-weight line.
Yeah, anything's gonna work.
Yeah, as long as it's correctly weighted to the rod. I know something that Paul was talking about. I know a lot of manufacturers now are making line weights, half a weight or a full weight or even more heavier than what's written on the box, and that makes no sense to me. So I do try and match the line correctly to the rod. No doubt about that.
That's right. Yeah, Bruce Richards was on the podcast, and he talked about that, the history of how, the lines get heavier. Things have, I think he was basically talking about how, was it the lines were trying to keep up with the rods as they got heavier? So everything just get heavier, and then right?
I can imagine what he's talking about. Basically, with particularly about 20 years ago when rods started to get very stiff.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, so they got stiff.
Yeah, and then people, maybe started uplining or putting out. I remember having this conversation with my father years ago a few times with people saying that you should always put a line weight heavier on a sage.
Right.
Said, it used to annoy me. Like, I said, no, that's not right. I remember having some quite heated arguments about it. And in the end, I realized, you know what? If people want to overline it, let them overline it. That was the reason for this overlining, I would imagine. It was, like you said, lines trying to match the rod. So like you take an average angler, give them a very fast action rod, and they may not be able to make it work with the line weight that it was suited for. But put more weight on it, and it's going to make the rod load more easily. So on. Yeah. So I guess that's why it came to be. But I certainly like to try and get the line weight matched well.
Are you a expert? Is casting something that you're kind of focus on?
Yeah, I love casting. I mean, I've fishing with Paul over the years. I watched Paul casting, and I learned a lot from Paul. And I'm not on any sort of world. I don't go into the competitions or anything like that. But no, I think I can cast very well, and I enjoy casting, and I teach casting all the time. So I did get some certification from the FA many years. And I was myself and Chris Dorr. He's a fishing guide over here. Myself and Chris I think we were the first two people in New Zealand to get that CI, which is back in 2005 now, so nearly 20 years. So yeah, I've been teaching casting almost as long as I've been fishing.
Wow! And you mentioned your grandpa at the start. Was he into the same thing? Was sea trout, Atlantic salmon? What was he fishing for back in the day?
He fished for salmon and sea trout and brown trout. Yeah, he had great stories of salmon and sea trout. I used to love listening to him. We fished together quite a lot when he was alive. And
what was it like? So you sat around, you heard some good stories from your granddad?
Yeah, and stories about places he'd been. I remember him telling me a story one time how he was fishing this small pool in a sea trout competition. But in all those sea trout competitions, you could still win them with a salmon if you were lucky enough to get one.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, Granddad was fishing down this pool, and he hooks into this salmon, and the salmon just goes and goes and goes. Tiny stream.
Right.
It's like a tiny stream in near Cashel in the west of Ireland. And he follows this thing down the river anyway, and he eventually lands it. And he loved telling me that the hook had drawn through the flesh in his mouth by about an inch.
Yeah.
Duration of the fight.
Yeah.
But he got him, and of course he was knocked on the head, and he won the competition by a mile.
Oh, he did? How big was it?
13.5 pounds, I think it was. Which was in the west of Ireland, that's a big salmon. So,
it is.
Yeah. So that's a story that I always remember from him.
That's cool. And are your kids, are they starting to think about getting them into it?
Yeah, my kids get it. They understand it. And just Lachlan, my boy, he's 5 now. And recently I took him up to a lake. And I hooked a fish and gave him the rod, and he reeled it in. And I thought that's all he'd need. But afterwards he said, I want to catch one myself.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
He understood that he didn't catch this fish. He only reeled. So the drive was then for him to catch one himself. So I gave him the spinning rod, and he almost got one himself that day. So he has got the fish trolling from the boat one day, but he was only 2. He doesn't really remember that. But now I think they've been bitten by the bug. And Adeline, my little girl, she's a very good caster with the spinning rod. And I've had her in the room here with just a little kind of practice casting rod. She's getting quite good at loading up, and her stop on the back cast is very good.
Right.
She with a nice line. So
amazing.
I'm not too far off trying to get them set up with some sort of rod and line that'll suit their size.
Yeah, that's right. What is the first rod? I guess do you get them a little short rod, or do you get them a full length rod, like a 9-foot rod?
Oh, I'd say short, actually. I have a little 7-foot rod here, but I would say short. Yeah. Maybe even one of those little practice rods would be a good thing to start.
Oh, right. The little, like the yarn type rod?
Yeah. I think something like that would be good, even just to get the just to practice those hand movements and it's all the fundamentals,
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, I think we've touched on a lot. I think it's given us always thinking about like New Zealand again. When you go there, as people are thinking about going there, what else would you tell somebody if they're putting together this trip? Maybe they're going to be there for a couple weeks. Other than fly fishing, what else could people be doing out there? What would you say to make it a great trip?
Don't waste a day doing anything other than fly fishing.
So fly fish the whole time.
Absolutely. It's like somebody said, I remember my father was out here one time. He's been out here about 10 times. And on one of the trips, like he comes out for a month and we fish 30 days. That's what we've always done. Yeah, we fish every day for 30 days.
So your dad comes out and you'll fish 30 days straight.
Yeah, that's what we used to do. Now that I have family, he's a little bit more relaxed. He's kind of happy to chill out a little bit more. But we'll still fish every day. Maybe just not absolute full days. Sometimes he might just pop down to the local river for a few hours. But certainly those first 7 or 8 trips, we fished every day for 30 days.
Yeah, that's great.
I remember someone said to him one day, did you go and see such a thing or some tourist attraction? And he looked at them like they were crazy. And I understand that. You come out, fish, you fish.
You fish. That's perfect. That's good advice. Good. Well, we mentioned it before. We'll send everybody out to, it's Ronan Flyfishing Missions, right? .com?
Ronan'sFlyfishingmissions.com. That's my website. Yep.
Perfect. And the missions what is the missions? Is that just the missions like you're on a mission, or what is the missions part of it?
Exactly. You're on a mission. When you go out with me for a week, it generally turns into a bit of a mission.
Yeah.
We're one way or another. There's, I don't know at the start of the week what's going to happen.
Right.
You just go with it.
That's what's great. Yeah, you don't know. And you might be, like you said, you could be doing a road trip, camping, you just go with it and have a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right, Ronan, we'll leave it there for now. I think it's been great chatting with you here. I still, every time I talk New Zealand, I'm like, all right, when am I going to be able to get to do this? I've got a family too, so it's tough to put it all together, but I'm hoping we can do this here the next couple of years and get over there and check out some of these brown trout. But I appreciate your time today and definitely hope to keep in touch with you, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Yeah, no, it was great, very enjoyable being on, enjoyable having the chat. Thank you.
All right, today's call to action. Check in with Ronan on Sexyloops. Head over to Paul's site, Sexyloops, and check out all the content that he has there. Over 20 years of blog posts and photos. Take a look at some of those photos and say hi to Ronan and Paul when you get a chance. And if you're interested in us putting this trip together over to New Zealand, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, or the better chance is to go over to our pro community, the shop, wetflyswing.com/the shop. And if you go there and you sign up for a membership, this is your best chance to connect with the community and to see some of these trips to fruition. This is the best way because I'm going to be listening to folks in the shop, in our pro community, and that's where we're going to be heading. So if you get a chance, head over there and you get a bunch of different benefits on top of that, including connection with the community, taking a deep dive, and some of the good stuff we have going. So the shop, it's on right now. We've opened it up. Check it out. All right, we got a big trip going on right now. Schultz Outfitters is taking us deep into smallmouth bass. If you want to find out about smallmouth, how to do it from one of the best in the country, Schultz Outfitters, Mike and the crew are going to be our guide this year. Check in with me. Send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. That's the best place to find out what we have available right now, and we'll try to reserve your spot if you want to kit your best bass trip of the year. All right, I'm out of here. It is a hot one. I hope you have a great afternoon. Hope you have a great evening or a great morning, wherever in the world you are. I look forward to seeing you on that next episode. Thanks for stopping in today.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.